Well, I think, the far-reaching implications can be seen all over the South now because of the number of African Americans who have held public office throughout the South, from local office on to congressional seats, and then ultimately, even though he's not from the South, the presidency of the United States, Barack Obama, I don't think could have ever been, I mean, I would never have dreamed growing up that we would have an African American president. But because of what Lyndon Johnson did in 1964, he made that possible.
What are your thoughts on this matter, sir?
I'm sorry to say, I'm not, you might say, caught up on all of that history. I was working too hard, just like I told you.
Yes, sir. Well, I mean, it did away with the Jim Crow laws, correct?
It did away with them.
And how were you affected by the Jim Crow laws during, your coming up in the world?
Well, see, here's the thing. I was born and raised right in San Marcos. The fellas that I was raised up with and the families that I was raised up with, they didn't see no color. No color. So I was with them all the time. Jack Gary, the sheriff, Bert Miller's up here, all of those people had kids, and I was just like one of their kids. So I didn't see any of that.
So basically you were born and existed in a cocoon.
You can say that.
Okay.
I was having a talk with Dr. Ed Mahawkanen, who's on our board just recently, about that issue in this area of Texas, Central Texas and San Antonio, and how we really did not see those signs of really terrible racism that you would see in Alabama or Mississippi. And I think one of the reasons is there weren't as many African Americans here, and you correct me if I'm wrong, Albert, but so they weren't perceived as quite the threat that they were in the South. Now, there was tremendous concern about the Hispanic vote, and you saw a lot of discrimination against Hispanics in the electoral system, and that began to change in the 60s too.
So what was the population, I mean, during both of y'all's stints, as far as the African American and the Mexican American? What was the ratio of population to the Euro American?
I just can't say it for this reason. My parents worked for the families, the white families here in San Marcos, and that's what made us a little bit different. See, and my dad, he worked at the wholesale company, and there I was, growing up with these kids that their parents didn't mind a black,
Yeah.
had black maid, and the black maid had kids, and they all mingled together, and it wasn't no problem. So it's hard for me to say.
Well, it sounds like, I've heard this story from many, many credible people, and I say credible because you can really feel it when they say it. You can see it in their eyes that San Marcos is a very special area, just physically speaking. I mean, we had one of the first Native American tribes that actually settled here, that one of the first non-nomadic tribes in the entire northern hemisphere. So, Mr. Cunningham, if I may ask, the powers that were given to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 initially were incredibly weak. Why was that so?
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with even though the laws were then put on the books, they had to be enforced, and the enforcement was a real problem. And so you had, generally, a lot of times African Americans had to go to court in order to validate those rights they had been given. And I think that's one thing that history has probably not given as much credit to is the role of the judiciary in enforcing that law. And a good many of those members of the judiciary were holdovers from the Eisenhower administration, a Republican administration, but they had the chairman of the Supreme Court at that time was Earl Warren, former Republican governor of California.
Oh, really? I did not know
Who was
that.
appointed by Eisenhower, and I think a lot of people expected him to be a good conservative Republican appointee, and instead I know he enforced the laws even before the passage of the civil rights, in Little Rock. That was when Earl Warren really first became very prominent in the national psyche. And there were parts of this state and all over the South where you'd see huge billboards that said, "Impeach Earl Warren." And,
2 years, no nation has loosed the atom against another. To do so now is a political decision of the highest order, and it would lead us down an uncertain path of blows and counter-blows whose outcome none may know. No president of the United States of America can divest himself of the responsibility for such a decision.
You are locked in live to San Marcos News Live, so lock it in, San Marcos, Texas.